with us here on stage. I say four is these four, in case you had any wondering about that. And I am really excited to talk with them. And first of all, you'll have to pay me afterwards because I overheard what they were just talking about. And that right there could be an article. It was fascinating. So with that, let me introduce our panel. Although they really need no introduction, I'm sure they have kept a lot of you up at night like they have me. Starting with Michael Koryta, who is turning 30 this year, or just turned 30, and has 10 novels out. So I don't know, turning. He's 29, 10 novels, which made me feel very lazy. And I hadn't known you until this latest book is coming out, The Prophet, and it kept me up. I was reading it on the plane ride up here, and it is fantastic. So now I go backwards in time, and we'll catch up on all of your work. Also, Michael Connelly. Michael is a longtime author, a best-selling author. He was also a finalist for a Pulitzer. He's been president of the Mystery Writers Association. He's consulted for Level 9 and TV shows, and he's also been gambling on the hit show Castle. Have you seen him gambling there? That's a nice thing. And Brad Meltzer, who's a good friend of mine, he is also, in addition to being a novelist, he has so many hats. He started out like I did as a lawyer and then found there were better things to do, I guess. We'll talk about that. Great novelist. He also has a show on the History Channel called Decoded. He's also even designed some clothing. So he's kind of done all of these things. Fantastic books. And Nelson DeMille, who has a storied career. I'm sure you've seen all of his books. And he started out, he's done everything. He's a decorated Vietnam War veteran, 3 honorary doctorates, and many of his books, Gatehouse Lion, Plum Island, General's Daughter, they go on and on. Everybody knows you as well. So we're very glad to have a terrific panel. So we're gonna start off. Let's start off with this. You know, Brad, you went to law school. Nelson, you went to Vietnam. Michael, you went off to be an award-winning journalist first. And Michael, you went to be a private investigator. Were those careers fallback plans for your dream of writing, or did writing emerge somehow later on as something you thought you'd do? So we'll start down here.
For me, it was always to feed writing. I've wanted to write ever since I began reading, really. I think it was a deep fear of having to work for a living that was put into me early. But really, the private investigation field was of interest, as an occupation. But I always had one eye toward how I could use that in a book. The books I fell in love with early were mysteries, and that was it was great. It was getting paid to research, essentially. Every day, even the really painful, long, boring 16-hour surveillances where no one moved and you just sat in the car. I looked at that as always grist for the mill. That was the way I kept reassuring myself on the long days. I always wanted to write, though.
Well, you're here in New York, so if you need any private investigative time, I'm sure they'll hook you up.
I'm sure there are people here, yes.
Great. Michael, how about you?
Yeah, I have kind of the same answer, grist for the mill. I wanted to write crime novels, and so it was kind of like I had very little experience in that world, so it's like, how do you get there? And I chose journalism. Always, the papers I worked for, I always asked to be on the police beat, and always wanted to stay on the police beat, so I could meet detectives, go to crime scenes, and kind of pick up the detail from there. And as you say, a fallback, it's a pretty interesting job. So, you say you want to be a novelist, but who knows if it can happen. And so I always thought this would be a pretty good job if it doesn't work out on the novel side.
I think it worked out.
So far.
I think so. Brad?
I also started, I went to law school out of fear. I was a coward. I grew up, and money was a big issue for my family. My dad was terrible with money, and I remember he would only fill up the car with like $2 worth of gas because he didn't have enough to actually say fill it up. And I went to law school because I was terrified. I didn't want to live like that. Money was a real issue for my family growing up, and so I went to law school completely out of fear so that if this writing thing didn't work out, I at least had something that would pay my bills because my dad couldn't pay the bills. And I never thought it was going to be research. I didn't think it was going to be grist for the mill. It wound up being there. As soon as I got there, everything went into the mill. So, but to me, I actually stumbled into it and then found that I loved talking to these imaginary people every day. I went to a job that didn't work out the way I wanted to, and I started getting rejection letters, and I didn't care. I got 24 rejection letters. There were only 20 publishers. I got 24 rejection letters, which means some people were writing me twice to make sure I got the point, but I said I love this and stumbled into it.
I thought about writing when I was in college for the first time, not in high school, but in college, and then I kind of put it on the back burner. I love to read, but I was so intimidated by the things I was reading because you're reading good stuff, you're not reading commercial stuff. I said, I could never do this, I could never do Hemingway, I could never do Fitzgerald. Then I started reading popular bestsellers, and I said, this is not that good, and I could do this. But I think it was the Vietnam experience that put me over the end. I said, I have a story. Like a lot of people coming back from war, you have a story to tell. And you don't want to say it verbally. You don't want to bore people with your war stories. And I had a diary which I kept in Vietnam. And I started taking this diary and I started building a novel around it. The novel never got published. But what it did is it got me into the idea that I could write and that I understood at least the basics of writing, and I was fortunate to have met an editor when I was in the Army, and we connected back in New York when we both came back from Vietnam. So, and if you live in New York and you want to be a writer, this is a good place to live. So you can't, in New York, you're going to bump into somebody who's in the business.
It's impossible not to.
Impossible not to.
But what drew you to this particular space, to thrillers, crime fiction? I mean, you all said you want to be a writer of some sort. What made you say, this is what I choose?
Well, the editor is what made me say this. This was like 1973, 74. I think the Vietnam War was still kind of on. Nobody wanted to read a Vietnam War novel, which is why this one was never published. But this guy, who was a paperback editor, said to me, everybody's interested in cops, especially New York cops. This is the era of Serpico, the Knapp Commission, Batman and Robin, the whole thing. And he said, I'm going to send you, we met in a bar. This is a good place to start being a writer. You might as well start where you're going to end anyway. And he said, I will send you 5 or 6 of these series, the Terminator series, that type of thing. It was very popular. Paperback pulp was in the 70s. And sure enough, he actually sent them. And I read them, and I said, I could do this. So, I mean, if you want to get published, pick the genre that, you don't have a problem. You don't have to overcome anything. This is what they were looking for. This is what I gave them. It's not what I stayed with. I didn't stay with police procedurals or police novels or the mystery genre, but it got me into the business.
How about you, Brad? And I know you've branched out to even do some books on heroes for your son and heroes for your daughter, but initially, what made you choose your genre?
For me, I just remember when I was younger, going to the library and getting a book by Agatha Christie. And Agatha Christie wrote, the first book I read that I remember really reading was Murder at the Vicarage. And to this day, I don't know what a vicarage is, right? I'm Jewish, I don't know. You know what? Don't tell me, I don't want to know to this day. But I remember that in chapter 1, right there, I opened that book, and as I went through it, there was a dead body, right? It was a dead person right there lying on the ground, and you can't help but ask, to me, the most important question of all, right? Which is, who done it? And I just remembered wanting to know. And it was the first book I ever remember. People like to put their nose in the air, especially here, and talk about the great book that they read, and they want to mention Moby Dick or Lolita or something that sounds impressive. But to me, it was Agatha Christie. It was the only thing that made me turn the pages until they did it, and I loved it. And those are only the people from HarperCollins because they published Christie. But the truth was, I was obsessed. That was what made me turn. So that was what I went to, just what I loved. I didn't really think about the commercial side of it. It's just the one thing I responded to.
And Michael, was it what you knew, having been a reporter?
No, because I wanted to be the writer before I was the reporter. I think you write what you read, I always had a hard time reading the classics, and getting into them, but I didn't have a hard time reading a good crime novel with, a relentless character at the center of it, trying to find, who did it. It's some kind of hidden truth. It's just maybe being a teenager or something, these stories were very powerful to me, so it just became a natural thing that I would want to, write these kind of stories.
And Michael, I've read The Prophet now, but I understand you write very different things, and it's...
Yeah, I've ranged around a little bit. But I think it all goes back to, what Brad and Michael and Nelson are talking about here, which you read what you write what you're compelled to read. And I think, much like with Brad, I go back to that central question. You know, our lives are so filled with uncertainty at every level. I mean, they're so fragile. And you know, you live in this little bubble of safety that can be disrupted very easily. And I think the writers that I sparked to early as a reader, you know, from the three gentlemen up here to Stephen King to Raymond Chandler to Dennis Lehane, they were all writers who took that form, that question, you know, the whodunit or why, and they brought it into an emotional context and a personal context in which you felt a deep emotional investment in the character. And you said, this could happen to me, no matter how strange, you know, no matter how horrible. And when you build that relatability, when that bond is there between the character and the audience, you know, that's a magical experience. And to have that as a reader, you want to carry that over and try and create it yourself. So that was my experience.
Excellent.
Does anyone know what a vicarage is?
Don't tell me. I don't want to know.
Oh.
Well, how about very rapidly, you mentioned Agatha Christie, just top of mind, not for posterity's sake, authors that inspired you early on. Who comes to mind?
Well, Hemingway first. Even Ian Fleming. I mean, you know, back in the early 60s when I was in college, everybody was reading Ian Fleming. And because we had to read some things like Hemingway and Steinbeck. All of them, they were all great. And then Agatha Christie was another one. That was what I used to read for fun. And Dorothy Sayers and all his English mysteries. The one I could read over and over and over again is Sherlock Holmes, though. I could read Conan Doyle. And I don't know what the magic was. It's so simple. It's not, by today's standards, there's nothing complex about it, and there's nothing particularly sophisticated about it. But there's something that man did with the writing, and I wish we could all analyze it and bottle it maybe. But I could read the complete works of Sherlock Holmes probably every year.
Great. Anybody else, Brad, in addition
You know,
to Agatha
obviously,
Christie?
beside Christie, you know, I never reread books. I never do. I'm just like, I want to read the next one, and I'm
Except your own?
Right, except my own. I read. Sometimes what I do is I actually read my own book and watch myself on my own TV show. That's pretty much. I just sit there and I'm just like, oh.
In your
Meltzer,
house of mirrors?
Right, full of mirrors, and I just go, oh, Meltzer, you've done it again. Because that's pretty much all I do in my life. But beyond Christie, there's a guy named Ken Grimwood who wrote a book called Replay. And Replay starts with a guy in his late 30s. He's sitting at his desk and he drops dead. And he wakes up and he's in his college dorm room. And he looks around and he gets to replay his life. And then when he gets to that exact age in his late 30s, on that exact day and exact time, you know, he bets on the Mets winning the '69 series. He makes a lot of money. He becomes rich as can be. Gets the exact same day, exact same time, and he dies. And he gets to replay again. He realizes money didn't solve anything. And then he says, okay, I'm going to live my life. You know, he invests in Apple, and he finds a guy in a garage named Steve Jobs, and he does all. I'm going to change it, and dies again. And I won't spoil the book for you, but what I love about the book is you can't help when you hear that plot to think to yourself, what would I do if I could relive my life again? And that, to me, is a great book because it makes you ask the question about yourself. So that book just had, it put its hooks in me, and it's actually, I'm rereading it right now, and it's just as good as I remember, which is, you know, to me, the best kind of book.
You're rereading a book you don't reread.
I'm rereading a book called Replay that replays the time I was rereading the book Replay.
Excellent. Michael?
Oh, well, you said inspiration. So, I mean, I was pretty widely read, but it was just, I was in the mode like I love reading this stuff. And when I read Raymond Chandler's books, it switched to I want to write this stuff. So I think that was the point of inspiration that shifted me towards the direction of wanting to be a writer.
Excellent. Extra points if you mention anybody else on this panel.
You know, Chandler and Hammett, and yeah, it led to Mr. Connelly, among others. But my dad was a big fan of film noir and Humphrey Bogart movies, Hitchcock, that sort of thing. So I actually started earlier in the genre. I started with Ross MacDonald and you know, Chandler and Hammett, and worked up. And then it was when I found writers like Dennis and Michael who were taking that, you know, that tradition, but moving it towards something contemporary and fresh, and with a lot more, I think, character depth. You know, that's what I really responded to. And it's that point Michael just said where the transition between I enjoy reading this to I want to write this. You know, that's a really significant moment.
The first time I met him, and he told me that stuff, and it was very nice of him to say that to me. I said, "Can I buy you a drink?" And he said, "I'm not old enough."
I'm not old enough.
actually
I've only written
yesterday.
6
Yeah,
books.
and he'd already published like 4 books. So,
That was 6 months ago.
Well, Michael Connelly, you've quoted Richard Price saying, if you circle a city long enough, if you circle a murder long enough, you come to know that city.
Right.
And each of you, in some ways, are kind of tied to a city. You perhaps Cleveland, though you're not totally tied. Obviously, L.A., and you have a DVD that I remember about Los Angeles. Clearly, Washington, D.C., and New York, Long Island. So how important is setting in place to the plot of your novels, and how much do you like to know the grist of the city or the area that you're writing about?
I think it's important. Somebody once said one of my books, I did write a Vietnam book eventually, that the second main character was Vietnam. I mean, it has to come alive. I mean, there are books that are set in fictional places that do well. It always amazes me. They do, like Metropolis. Well, okay, the writing is good, whatever. The story might be good, but it's the place, it's the time and the place, and especially if it's a regional book, books about the South can only be. You need to feel that. I wrote a couple of books set on Long Island. I tried to capture Long Island as best I knew it. I grew up there. The North Shore, I wrote the Gold Coast, and a lot of people afterwards said it was the best book they read about the North Shore of Long Island since The Great Gatsby. There's only actually been two. One of them was Gatsby, and one of them was mine, but that was a good compliment. But it wasn't for that
best book.
Second best book on the North Shore of Long Island. But if it wasn't for the place, if it wasn't for the Gold Coast, there would have been no book, right?
Critical. And DC, you live in Florida, but I don't know if you have
I
any...
lived in DC for almost a decade, and to me, listen, setting his character, right? I mean, and I think every novel is a giant lie that's trying to masquerade as the truth, right? We are lying on every page. We're making it all up and trying to convince you it's real. And I can make up whatever I want. I can say there are underground tunnels that go from the White House to Disney World, and they go the whole way. And then, right, you laugh, and you know that that's nonsense because our society today has so much access to information. We have the best BS meters of any society, right? We know we're being lied to very quickly. But if I say to you, you're in the lower parts of the White House or on the ground floor corridor, and you're going to see a statue of FDR on your left, make a left at the statue. You're going to enter a room where there are chairs stacked to the ceiling. That's where they store the chairs for the state dinner. Now go out the back of that door. You're going to feel air conditioning ducts above your head. They're going to go downward. You're going to smell flowers. The White House flower shop is on your left. Go to the dead end, and you're going to see it when you make a right-hand turn, a steel door. That's actually the secret underground tunnel below the White House. That's the bomb shelter. Now you go, wow, that's real. And and that is real. That's where it really is. And suddenly that fake scene that I'm trying to convince you is real takes on a whole new reality. And I think, to me, I guess I can make it up, but to me it's so much better when you have it feel like it really did take place.
Yeah, I think an A+ reading experience is when the reader just melds with the main character and they just connect, and they don't even know it, but they're nodding their head as they're reading because, I get that, I would do that, I understand that person. And one of the tricks, I guess you call it a trick, of delivering that or making that empathic bond is in delineating their world. And so if you're going to write about Los Angeles, get Los Angeles right. And throw in all these kind of little details that sell that connection. And so as Brad said at the top of his statement, place is really character. There's a tendency to cut everything into place and character and plot, and everything is all it's all one thing, and it's really character. And that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, I'd agree, absolutely. It needs to feel like a character. I think one of the things that any good writer is doing with place at all times is showing how it has shaped and changed the main character, whether they're still there during the course of the book or whether it's someplace they left. We're all shaped and changed by the places from which we came, and you can't get away from that. It's like trying to get away from your shadow. That you carry that with you, and so I try and look at how place would affect the decisions the character makes, because to me, good drama is choices and consequences, and if the place can affect the choice and lead to the consequence, I think that's a really organic, nicely tied narrative, and I love to come across that in great writers, and these guys are all doing it all the time.
Okay, this is going to require a one-word answer. Ready?
Good, good.
We're in a dawn of ebooks. We all grew up with physical books. When you're reading, do you prefer print or digital?
Print.
Brent.
Print.
Brent,
All right.
I should have said digital just to be contrary.
How has the explosion in digital devices and ebooks affected you? Does it do anything to the way you write or kind of think about readers? I know Michael Connelly last year, I think you got into the Million Kindle Club as one of the first people in that. Does that change anything for you, or is it really, no, our process remains the same and that's just another output?
Listen, Michael won't answer that question because he's in the Million Kindle Club. He doesn't want to. Please, just don't even avert your eyes from him. He's in the Million Kindle Club right now.
No, I will answer it. No, I mean, I think we all have the same answer. It's a, you know, they say, hope you live in interesting times. Well, it's certainly an interesting time. But as far as it affecting the process, I can't see it having any effect. We tell stories, and we're lucky that they can be told in different forms. And but you got to keep your head down and just write the best story, and then let the society and industry and so forth determine public taste and how people want to read and so forth. That comes after you've written the story, and it's really, to me, shouldn't really affect the story.
Well, I want to turn to something else. You know, the average citizen out there, average reader is out there, and you know, we think they write these books, and somehow they sit in a writer's knoll, and out comes this beautiful work, and they write, and that's it, and you're done. And really, it's just the beginning, right? It's all the promotion and the author tours and all of that. But one new way to reach readers is through social media, through blogs, through Twitter, through Facebook. How are you using social media? Has that helped you kind of connect with people? How are you using kind of technology, or are you using technology? Who wants to start? You want to start?
I'm often chastised for not using it enough by people who are probably in this room, so I'm trying to improve on that. And you know, it's a really interesting thing. I think the connection with readers is great. You know, anytime you can get more feedback from a reader, I think that's a really wonderful thing, because you're writing these stories for a reader, and it's great to get the feedback. At the same point, every hour you spend on a blog or on Facebook or tweeting is an hour you're not devoting to the craft and to the story. And ultimately, the relationship is supposed to be between character and reader. And if you're pillaging time from that to feed the publicity and social media side, then I think that's dangerous. So it's a fine line, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, Michael's right. I mean, I have to say, I don't do a lot of social media, but I do a monthly newsletter, which takes me away from my writing for about 2 hours. But if you expanded that into something else, the tweets, it is a fine line. I mean, I'm going to use more of it for this book. My last book was almost 2 years ago, and the social media certainly existed then, but now it's like imperative. Now it's here, and I was speaking to somebody from my publisher this morning about social media, and yeah, I'm going to do it. I mean, it's there. I think the only objection all writers have, like Michael does, is the amount of time that it could take away from what you're supposed to be doing, which is writing. No other objection. I don't think so.
So time.
Yeah, no, and listen, I think a lot of social media is just fear, right? It's like, it's the buzzword. If you don't, you're not on Twitter, you suck. You're not on Facebook, you don't have enough people, you suck. You're screwing it up. Like I think no one wants to admit it, but you do it because you're fearful if you don't, and that's the thing that everyone's doing. But at the end of the day, if your story is not good, I don't care how many friends you have on Facebook. It doesn't matter, right?
Really.
So I know people have like, I got 50,000 people. I'm like, yeah, but your book sucks.
They're not true friends.
So
True friends buy the book.
that's it. You got. But I do think also, forget about social media because it's such a buzzword. I do think that every author today that's published has to have a little Barnum in them, just to get published, right? It used to be, you write your book and you can go be a recluse. No one can even afford to be a recluse anymore. Like, God bless the guys who can be the recluses. God bless when you write To Kill a Mockingbird, that you can write one book and go disappear. Authors today, unless it was To Kill a Mockingbird, you're going to get scolded and you're going to get, you have to come out, you got to make your appearances, you got to go do your stuff. And that's just the way in this kind of hyper, I have to touch everything world, they expect authors to be these days, right? I mean, and whether it's the reality or it's not, it's just the world we live in.
Hold on one second. I got to take a picture of you so I can tweet it out.
That's right. My good side.
No, I agree. I have nothing new to add.
Nothing
You
to add.
just got to find a balance so you can keep doing what you're supposed to be doing and what you wanted to do from the very beginning. Just write stories.
Who reads your first draft when you write something?
My wife reads mine. Well, my wife reads mine before I'm done the books. Like she
As you
kind of
go.
back reads. And
Does she edit? Suggest?
yeah.
Yeah, my wife also, I don't consider my book written until my wife reads it. I really don't. It's not even a first draft until she reads it. And I think she's ruthless. I mean, she really is. And she constantly does the same thing. She's like, she takes out all the jokes and says, you're not funny, and I basically put them back in and say I'm hysterical. But the truth is she's right, and you have to find that balance. And I think, I'm sure, I'm sorry to speak for Michael, but I'm guessing it comes from the same spot, which is having someone who you just truly trust is not lying to you. Right. My editor is standing here in the audience, and she knows when she says something's good, my first reaction is, no, it can't be. It must be something else wrong. What else is wrong? And I feel like that's the only way to make your work better is to find what's wrong with it. And to do that, you need to have someone who's honest enough to tell you, this is not great. Because it's easy to, after your 9th book, your 8th book, it's easy to find people to tell you it's great. That is not helpful at all.
You want the constructive criticism. How about you?
I'm a big believer in the idea of getting a draft done before I show it to anyone. That's just how I've always worked. But my fiance is an early reader, and then the gentleman who actually taught me to write when I was working for a newspaper, he was a retired sports editor at the time. He was my first reader when I was 17, and unfortunately he's still tasked with that today. So he's hoping to be able to hang that up at some point, but I keep sending
You won't
along
let
his red pen. And his red pen still appears pretty often, so I clearly need to learn some lessons again.
It's great. How about you? Who reads your first draft?
Nobody should read the first draft.
Nobody.
I mean, it's the old joke. Passing around your first draft is like passing around samples of your sputum. I don't type. I don't know how to type. I used to know how to type, but I have an assistant who types. So, by default, she reads my first draft. I read my second. The first draft is the craft. Okay. Second draft is supposed to be the art, maybe. Third draft. By the fourth draft, I'm ready to show it to my wife. But nobody sees the first draft or the second or the third.
Well, I just want to ask this. When you first start writing and then you see your name on the bestseller list, which has got to be a thrill, or maybe not, but I would think it would be. False humility aside, that was a big deal, and you've all done it. But Michael Connelly, I know President Clinton was famously seen carrying one of your books, and Brad, I think you have a story with President H.W. Bush, who sent you a secret letter from that he gave to Clinton. But what's it like? Who's the fan? The fan that you got a piece of mail or you got something and you were just like, wow, that kind of thrilled me. Or will you not admit it? Who was it? Who was it?
I'll tell you.
You go.
I mean, I got letters from Bush and from Clinton, and that's cool. This is the coolest letter I got. 2 of them. One, the first girl I ever kissed wrote me. And that's awesome, right? It's the first girl you kissed, she read the book, I'm like, right. She's like, no, I didn't read it, I just saw you wrote it. And I was like, oh. But my true favorite was, there was this, this is just the sign of getting older, is there was this young kid who used to come to my signings, and every time the kid would come, I would always say, he was like, I'm gonna be a writer. And you just know some of these young kids who are truly, they mean what they say. And I would always give this kid encouragement, and eventually just recently wrote to me and said, my first book's coming out. That's awesome. That is all. And then, it just said, I want to thank you. You were one of the people who encouraged me from the start. And that to me that's as lucky as you get.
Anybody else brave enough?
Well, I get letters from politicians, which kind of strange. Maybe not politicians. Like William F. Cohn, Secretary of Defense. We kind of became friends afterward. And then Donald Rumsfeld, Secretary of Defense. So I had the feeling that my books were making the rounds of the Defense Department. But the one I got recently was from Newt Gingrich before he started running. I guess he had time on his hands. And he wrote me a very critical letter about one of my books, Wildfire. He loved the writing, but he didn't like the premise. So it's interesting that people sit down. These are people you see on TV, and they're bigger than life to you sometimes, and then they think they've got to sit down and write to an author, and usually with praise, but sometimes with criticism.
Awesome.
I wanted to tell a story about Nelson. One of my early books got blurbed by Nelson DeMille, who I was a great fan of. And it was a really nice blurb, long, and I think I only had 2 blurbs on that book, so it was very important. And I met him at a BEA about 15 years ago, and I said,
L.A.
thank you for blurbing my book. And he said, yeah, my secretary really liked it.
No, I wouldn't say that.
And that's informed my blurb giving ever since.
Well, they say you have your choice. I could read your book or I could blurb your book, but I can't do both.
Any you want to share?
I'm sorry.
Do you want to share any?
Well, I was going to talk about how much it means to me to hear from the writers I've really admired because I'm such a fanboy, but now Michael just crushed those hopes and dreams, and I know that all of my blurbs and quotes have been rendered meaningless, so no, I'm done now.
They're
He
done.
dried me out and crushed my soul.
Great. Well, we're going to try to revive your soul.
Okay, that's
for
good.
that.
me
So
up.
what I want to do, I have a bunch of questions that I can continue to ask because there's just unbelievable creativity. But I want to throw open and see if you have any questions. So I'll give you a second. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run down and talk with you. So we're going to ask the first question. Or unless you were just bidding, $5, $5, $6. No. What would you like to ask?
I would like to know if you all use an outline to do your plots before you actually start writing, or do you just let your characters take you where they want to go?
All right, outlining or organic process, Nelson?
Mostly organic. I have a general outline. You have to know, where it's going. You want to know the ending, but otherwise, whatever happens, happens. And then if it's not happening right, you have a chance to rewrite.
He writes in bars, so it's got to be organic, right?
I outline, but only about 50 to 100 pages. I know the ending, and that way if I outline the whole thing, then I'm just following like a dot to dot, and it's not fun. So just short hunks.
Right.
Same answer.
Same answer?
Yeah, I don't outline. I think that would take a lot of the fun of it away from me. It's, when you're reading, it's a journey of discovery, and you don't know where it's going. And if you can put yourself in the same position as a writer, then it's a lot of fun. I mean, it's a great time every day.
Good mixture. I always love to know what people do about that. Good question. Yes?
What's your writing process? Do you write a certain number of words per day, a certain number of pages per day?
So do you have goals? I want to write X pages per day, or I know I failed. I can't have dinner unless how do you do that?
I do 1,500 words a day minimum. I write really sloppy, ugly first drafts, probably because I don't outline. So 1,500 words a day.
And do you do that even today?
That's 7 days a week. So
All the time?
Yep.
Okay.
Huh.
I don't have a word count. I just move the story a significant step every day. And if I do that, I know in about 4 months I'll have a draft.
So you do plot milestones kind of in your mind. Okay. Brad?
I used to try to do 8 to 8 pages a day because I was young. Now I try to get about 3, and if I get them, I'm happy. I only do it Monday to Friday. I take the weekends off to recharge. I just want to be with my kids.
It's just so amazing to me when you think about these books. 3 pages a day. These are just steady things. And anybody who's aspiring to be a writer, we can all write 3 pages, right? That's great.
Well, there are good days and bad days. I don't have writer's block per se, but I have better days. And if I know I'm doing well, as my wife will testify, I will stay there till 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. If it's not going well, you go home at 5 o'clock and have a drink. But so there's no goal in terms of words. But if you're really on that day, and there are days when you're on, you're over caffeinated or whatever, you're going to stay there until you can't even keep your head up anymore. So there are 3,000 word days and there are 300 word days.
You go with it,
Right.
depending on what happens. Other questions? Or you can bid on something.
I'm curious about how you get details for some of the scenes. For example, if you have to have a setting with a fight scene with a criminal, how do you how do you get the details? Do you call your friends at the police force and have?
So research, how do you get the details that make it so rich? Like Brad, you were talking about all those specifics. They're probably not things that people just know. So how do you research and get the details for your plot?
I think context, and I was a reporter for a while and an investigator, and to work with, you understand just how little you know about everything after you've done that job, and to find people who actually inhabit that world, that's the only way to get it right. And you're going to get so much gold out of actually taking the time to try and get inside their skin and get inside the world that they live in. To just try and write it from the outside looking in and relying on imagination and Google, I think, would be a disaster.
Yeah, I'm a former journalist, so I really enjoy doing physical research, going to all the places I write about, and figuring out how to get access to places that are not easily accessible or publicly accessible. I think it's important to take what you're making up, your fiction, and anchor it in a reality that's there. So get the streets right, go to those places. In 25 books, I've only written about one place I never actually got to, and it came back to haunt me when people said, like, you were never there, were you? And it's like,
Wow.
They got that right. So.
Yeah, same. I like to go there. I also just think if you just ask. I mean, if someone called you today and said, I'm researching a book, I just want 10 minutes of your time to tell me about your job, very few people would say no. Even in the Secret Service, it'd surprise you. I know the word secret is in the title, but you'd be surprised. They even now.
Even now?
Even now, they will. I mean, especially if you put them in a book and you make them the hero, they'll really tell you a lot.
I think it probably is easier if they called, but that's just my guess.
Yeah, people like to talk about their jobs, even if it is secret or if it's sensitive. I mean, when I started researching the books for John Corey books are the Joint Terrorist Task Force in Manhattan. These are FBI and New York City cops working together, but also some CIA. And they love to talk about what they do, but I find that people in sensitive jobs who are retired will tell you a lot more than when they're obviously on the job.
What they have the time. Another question. Okay.
I noticed there's only men on this panel, so I wanted to ask you who are some of your favorite female writers in your genre, and I wonder why you think their work is different from yours or the same as yours?
This is a trick question. Don't answer this question.
Yeah, this is.
Nothing good can come of this answer.
That's right. Nelson's right. I will say that I did notice that when we got up here, I was thinking, boy, would I like my friend Laura Lipton to be sitting here right now.
Yeah, Laura's great.
For sure. Plus, Agatha Christie should be sitting here too, but that would be a much harder one to pull off.
That'd be a different conference.
Yeah.
Laura Lipton, Gillian Flynn, I think she's fantastic. S.J. Roseanne has been great for a number of years. There's a newer female writer, Laurie Roy, won the Edgar this year. I loved her first book was Bent Road. Lori Moore is another favorite of mine. Anita Shreve. I mean, I can go on and on and on with great female writers. So, there's no shortage of them out there. And I think, as the question was, how different is the work, or why is the work different? I don't know in that many cases that it is. Obviously, there's a different sensibility and worldview and experience, but I think a great writer, a great female writer, can inhabit the world and skin of a male protagonist just fine, and a great male writer can do the same. I mean, I think everyone here has written from a female point of view at a different point in the journey, and that's part of the challenge and fun. But yeah, there's so many great female writers. I'll go the rest of the panel naming them off, so I'll cut myself off there.
Yeah, it's actually because I write this for a living. Reading like books like by male writers, male protagonists, it's too much like my work, and like you see the writer behind the lines. And so for escaping into fiction, I like to not only read about other locations, foreign countries and so forth, but I might be more inclined to read a book written by a woman than a male. We should mention Denise Mina.
Denise Mina,
yeah.
Megan Abbott. So there's a lot of really good writers, but I don't like differentiate. these are male books, these are female books.
Great. And Nelson, we'll just save you. You want to be saved?
Agatha Christie is my favorite
Okay,
writer.
very good. Good. And a plug for my friend Karen Slaughter. She's really good.
Yeah.
She called you, Michael, a teddy bear. I said, teddy bear? Really?
What?
Karen said
She
yesterday
called
you
me
were
a
a
teddy
teddy
bear?
bear. He's so wonderful. He's a teddy bear. I thought, really? Have you read his books? They're scary. Another question. You know, once I did this, I ran out into the audience, and you know, I hold the microphone because somebody grabbed it and started singing White Christmas. I guess they thought it was their debut. It's very scary. Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you all. This has been a great panel, and I'm just going to ask a few quick questions in the style of Inside the Actor's Studio. So you're going to have to give some quick answers to some random questions of whatever pops in your mind. Starting with, who is your favorite character in history?
Fictional?
Wait, in the live
Great.
real
Yep.
person?
Anybody in
Fictional
history?
or
Fictional or real?
yeah,
Either one.
Huckleberry Finn.
Huckleberry Finn.
Is that
George
real?
Washington.
I don't know. Julius Caesar.
Julius Caesar.
Philip Marlowe.
All right. What's your earliest memory?
My mother coming into my nursery school class and baking cupcakes for us. And I was sitting on top of her chest, and I was slicing her throat and holding her and choking her. But I don't think that that's important to the dream.
I'm old enough to remember VE Day and NBJ Day. And I was just a kid. I mean, I was born, but I was a kid. And that is my earliest memory, because it was so, everything was electric. People understood something had happened, and as a little kid, I understood. And then about 2 or 3 months after the war ended, my father came home. He's a Navy guy in uniform, and I was 2.5 years old, and it's vivid.
I remember my father bringing home this brand new invention called a Frisbee. And
The Frisbee?
yeah, and throwing it in we had this long dormer back porch in a house. We left that house in 1958, so it was I must have been only 1 or 2, but I remember that.
I was fascinated with locks, and I stole my mother's keys and tried to use them to open a lock, and it turned out the lock was actually an electrical outlet. And I vividly remember her face just before I ceased to remember anything at all for a little while. And I think that is actually where the supernatural ideas later came
Just
from.
came in.
Credit it back to that first good jolt.
What is your most treasured possession?
Signed first edition of the Black Echo.
All right.
Shameless plug.
Good
Wow.
answer. Good answer.
My daughter, I guess. I don't know if I can call her possession,
possession.
but
Yeah,
yeah.
I think my kids.
Kids.
My marriage license.
Marriage license. Very good.
His wife does not agree with that. I see her face right there.
She's not like. What trait do you most deplore in yourself?
Deplore?
Deplore in yourself. Maybe we should have the significant other's answer.
Procrastination for me.
Procrastination.
That's a good one.
I am racked with guilt. If I feel like I've harmed someone, I can't let it go.
Started with your first memory.
Yeah, no, sure.
I just want back every word that leaves my mouth most of the time, so.
That's why you're a writer, though, right? The whole thing of being a writer is that you get all
You-
those
you
moments
have
in
that
time
chance.
where you say, "I wish I said something perfect." You get the time to say
get
it.
the chance.
Like I remember seeing this one person I didn't like, and I remember just spending so much time on what I was going to say, and then I just put them in a book and killed them, and it was so much easier.
Let out the anger.
That's right.
We'll have a therapy session for Brad afterwards if anybody would like to stay. Do you have a trait you deplore in yourself? Or
Like most people, procrastination.
Procrastination.
You know, we understand that we procrastinate. Most people do, and it's not a bad thing. I mean, if you do it, you got to live with it. But you got to make it a good thing. Because people who take the bull by the horns and don't procrastinate often make mistakes. That's my logic and my excuse. But we all procrastinate, and authors procrastinate. But you got to sit there every day and begin the book.
And Hachette's saying that you're giving us
Right.
excuses already to turn it
Got
in.
lots of excuses.
Turn it in. Great. Well, any last questions? Well, thank you all. This has been a great. Why don't you give a huge round of
Thank you very
applause
much.
for our
Thank you.
great thriller writers? And I will plug them anyway. You can follow them on Facebook and find them on Twitter and find all of them. It's just terrific. So thank you all. Have a great afternoon.
They'll get you to do that.